In this Tech Powwow, we are going to be looking at the decentralization myth. Now, it should be of note, I'm only discussing this video from the perspective of the technical view in the context of what is being technically promised or what is technically possible, you might say. There might be other views. For instance, if somebody were to ask me about any of the decentralized projects from, let's say, a financial perspective, I would just point out that that is actually a very different viewpoint because the financial view or the trading view, just because something is not a good idea does not mean it doesn't have its day. There's a really good book by George Soros called, The New Paradigm for Financial Markets. And one of the takeaways from that book is that just because an idea may not be good or whatnot doesn't mean that things can't go through a phase where they do actually very well. As far as the technical part of many of these projects, one of the things I want to point out, there was a recent example I saw that was related to a project called Filecoin. And a friend of mine was talking about this, and he made this statement that unlike Azure and AWS, he's like, this project is going to allow you to host any content that you want because all the hosts are decentralized and thus you can't be censored. Now, there's a lot of questions that I would have about what is being censored on Azure and AWS in the first place, but this is actually not true, not only just not technically, but even legally, because being completely uncensored is only going to be true up to a certain point, right? For instance, one of my friends would tell you that he was censored on AWS because he was hosting content that they apparently didn't approve of, until he then tells you that, well, actually the content he was hosting was copyrighted material that he was allowing other people to download for free. That's not being censored. That's called you're doing something illegal, right? And it's true that there might be a period in which you're allowed to do things like that, but that might be because they have a deal with like law enforcement or whatnot where they're allowing illegal behavior because they're really secretly reporting on it. This is what I point here. Always remember Vladimir Lenin in Controlled Opposition, right? Like if you're allowed to do illegal behavior, you should be immediately suspicious. Or let me just say, if somebody allows people to do illegal behavior, I would immediately be suspicious because, as Solomon would say, there's no honor among thieves, right? If somebody's doing something illegal, you should be suspicious of them in the first place. But you're not going to be able to do whatever you want because while there may be a season in which you're allowed to do that, that season generally is going to end at some point. And so if the technical promise is all of the hosts are decentralized, therefore you'll never be censored, well, it depends on what you're doing. It's true that if you're just writing something because you like it, let's say you're writing about plants and for whatever reason, let's say Azure and AWS are saying you can't write about, let's say, tomato plants or whatever, then yes, you can't be censored as long as that's not illegal. But if that becomes illegal, that may be why they're censoring. For the record, that's been my observation about both of those platforms. So decentralization, as it's presented by many people in the tech community, not everyone, but by many people in the tech community, doesn't actually exist. Easy reasons why this decentralization is refuted. Number one, this may exist up until the time it becomes a threat or it becomes illegal. Consider that people used to say this about, WikiLeaks? And it's true that Julian Assange, you could say he got away with a lot of things. Yeah, up to a point, right? And then he didn't. And most of these ideas, or some of these ideas, I should say, violate basic security principles such as linkability. So just keep that in mind, because that not only becomes dangerous just in the fact that, hackers can basically track everything and they can compromise you, but it makes monitoring easy. So one of the earliest, or one of the only videos, I should say, there was a couple of videos that I recorded on Bitcoin on this channel from way, way back in the day. They've been both taken down since then because of all the hype. But one of the videos I pointed out, I was criticizing people who were claiming that Bitcoin was anonymous because I was like, that's not true. Bitcoin has never been anonymous. And it's the same with all these tech projects. Even if you were to say that one of the tech projects which claims to be private was developed on an air-gapped machine, except I know 12 different ways to attack an air-gapped machine. So there's no such thing as a real air-gapped machine in terms of what's being promised, right? The promise is that it's unhackable. Wrong. It's very compromisable. And there are probably 100 ways to go after an air-gapped machine. So, if I know 12, an expert probably knows 50 or 100, right? So the point is that those promises can't hold either. These are not secure projects, despite what they're pretending to be, okay? Also, let's think back to what was the internet's promise, right? It's a global source of information where we would all discover the truth. Which is funny, looking back on it. And by the way, I bought into that hook, line, and sinker when I was a kid. But if that was true, I guess it never occurred to me, then why aren't most people spending time at the library, right? Because at the time there was a lot of information at libraries. Nobody was spending very much time there, right? Most people use the internet for entertainment. They don't actually use it for a global source of information, right? And then, of course, new ideas just in general never and will never override human nature, right? Humans are going to do what humans have always done. And so none of them are going to override that. Now, in the past, there was a video that I recorded. Again, it was also taken down because of the hype cycle. But there was a past discussion that I was talking about Ethereum and it being potentially centralizable. And I pointed out that it has always felt more centralizable in that, and this was the context, that insiders could change the network as they want to suit their interest over the interest of the participants. So think about that type of decentralization versus this type of decentralization that I'm talking about. So in the context of decentralization, centralization here, we're not talking about illegal behavior. We're talking about what I would consider to be corruption. It's when you have a centralized community that benefits itself at the expense of others. Ironically, that should be illegal. But that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about decentralization or centralization in that past video. I was not talking about decentralization as, you could do whatever you want. No, because that's not good for society. All right, many of us know that there are many reasons why we have the laws that we do, right? So as a case in point, a good example of this is if you think about, 2008, 2009, and the bailouts, and the companies that failed got bailed out, right? That's an example of a centralizable system that benefits insiders at the expense of everyone. Because fundamentally, taxpayers, people who are part of the system paid for that through inflation, right? So this type of discussion of decentralization and centralization is talking about that type of system where you have a central authority or a central community, I should say, that is benefiting at the expense of others. The other type of centralization, decentralization, is outside the law. Well, there's reasons why laws exist, and there are good reasons why those laws exist. So if the decentralization is talking about doing anything you want, that is not going to be a promise that anybody in any tech community is ever going to is going to hold to. If the decentralization is talking about reducing the risk that a small community benefits at the expense of others, that is a problem that tech might be able to assist with solving. There is possibility there. But be careful about demarcating between those. Those are not the same. And so when I say the decentralization myth, I'm referring to the myth that we'll be able to do whatever we want and no authority will have control. That's a myth because there will always be an authority that we answer to.